Francesca da Rimini. Francesca da Rimini, Italian pronunciation. Francesca da Rimini or Francesca da Polenta IPA. Francesca da Polenta, 1255 c. 1285, was the daughter of Guido da Polenta, Lord of Ravenna. She was a historical contemporary of Dante Alighieri, who portrayed her as a character in the Divine Comedy. Life and Death. Daughter of Guido I da Polenta of Ravenna, Francesca was wedded in or around 1275 to the brave, yet crippled Giovanni Malatesta, also called Gianciotto or Giovanni the Lame, son of Malatesta da Verrocchio, Lord of Rimini. The marriage was a political one. Guido had been at war with the Malatesta family, and the marriage of his daughter to Giovanni was a way to secure the peace that had been negotiated between the Malatesta and the Polenta families. While in Rimini, she fell in love with Giovanni's younger brother, Paolo. Though Paolo, too, was married, they managed to carry on an affair for some 10 years, until Giovanni ultimately surprised them in Francesca's bedroom sometime between 1283 and 1286, killing them both. In Inferno. In the first volume of the Divine Comedy, Dante and Virgil meet Francesca and her lover Paolo in the second circle of hell, reserved for the lustful. Here, the couple are trapped in an eternal whirlwind, doomed to be forever swept through the air just as they allowed themselves to be swept away by their passions. Dante calls out to the lovers, who are compelled briefly to pause before him, and he speaks with Francesca. She obliquely states a few of the details of her life and her death, and Dante, apparently familiar with her story, correctly identifies her by name. He asks her what led to her and Paolo's damnation, and Francesca's story strikes such a chord within Dante that he faints out of pity. Works of art inspired by the Inferno scene. Reception after Dante. In the years following Dante's portrayal of Francesca, legends about Francesca began to appear. Chief among them was one put forth by poet Giovanni Boccaccio in his commentary on the Divine Comedy, Esposizioni sopra la Commedia di Dante. He stated that Francesca had been tricked into marrying Giovanni through the use of Paolo as a proxy. Guido, fearing that Francesca would never agree to marry the crippled Giovanni, had supposedly sent for the much more handsome Paolo in Giovanni's stead. It wasn't until the morning after the wedding that Francesca discovered the deception. This version of events, however, is very likely a fabrication. It would have been nearly impossible for Francesca not to know who both Giovanni and Paolo were, and that Paolo was already married, given the dealings the brothers had had with Ravenna and Francesca's family. Also, Boccaccio was born in 1313, some 27 years after Francesca's death, and while many Dante commentators after Boccaccio echoed his version of events, none before him had mentioned anything similar. In the 19th century, the story of Paolo and Francesca inspired numerous theatrical, operatic, and symphonic adaptations. Related works. Poetry. Dante, Divine Comedy Inferno, Canto V, lines 73 142 1308 1321. Leigh Hunt, The Story of Rimini 1816. Theatre and Opera. Silvio Pellico, Feliciano Strepponi, Francesca da Rimini Opera in 2 acts, libretto by Felice Romani Padua 1823. Luigi Carlini, Francesca da Rimini, Opera in 2 acts, libretto by Felice Romani Naples 1825. Saverio Mercadante, Francesca da Rimini, Opera Madrid 1831. Pietro Generali, Francesca da Rimini Opera, libretto by Paolo Pola Venice 1828. Gaetano Quilasci, Francesca da Rimini Opera in 2 acts, libretto by Felice Romani Lucca 1829. Giuseppe Staffa, Francesca da Rimini, opera in 2 acts, libretto by Felice Romani, Naples, 1831. Giuseppe Fornier-Gora, Francesca da Rimini, opera in 2 acts, libretto by Felice Romani, Livorno, 1832. Giuseppe Tamburini, Francesca da Rimini, opera in 3 acts, libretto by Felice Romani, Rimini, 1835. Francesco Morlacchi, Francesca da Rimini, opera composed for Venice, 1836, but unperformed. Emanuele Borgata, Francesca da Rimini, opera in 3 acts, libretto by Felice Romani, Genoa, 1837. Gioacchino Maglione, Francesca da Rimini, opera Genoa, 1840. Eugen Nordl, pseudonym of Johann Arnold Gruber, Francesca da Rimini, opera after Paolo Pola Linz, 1840, performed posthumously. Salvatore Paparlato, Francesca da Rimini, opera in 4 acts, Genoa, 1840, unperformed. Francesco Canetti, Francesca da Rimini, opera, libretto by Felice Romani, Vicenza, 1843. Vincenzo Sassaroli, Francesca da Rimini, opera, libretto by Felice Romani, Catania, 1846. George Henry Boker, Francesca da Rimini, play, 1853. Giovanni Franchini, Francesca da Rimini, opera in 3 acts, libretto by Felice Romani, Lisbon, 1857. Gianni Uda, Francesca di Rimini, play, 1860. Giuseppe Marcarini, Francesca da Rimini, opera, libretto by Benvenuti Piacenza, 1870. Hermann Goetz, Francesca von Rimini, opera in 3 acts, libretto by the composer Mannheim, 1877. Overture and Act Roman 3 completed by Ernst Frank. Antonio Cagnoni, Francesca da Rimini, opera in 4 acts, libretto by Antonio Gislanzoni, Turin, 1878. Gabriele D'Annunzio, Francesca da Rimini, tragedy, 1901, written for D'Annunzio's mistress, Eleonora Duse. Ambroise Thomas, Francois de Rimini, opera, Paris, 1882. Antonio Scontrino, Francesca da Rimini, tragedia in fact an opera in 5 acts, libretto after D'Annunzio, Rome, 1901. Stephen Phillips, Paolo and Francesca, play, 1902. Francis Marion Crawford, Francesca da Rimini, play in 5 acts, 1902. Marcel Schwab, Francesca da Rimini, play, translation of Crawford given with music by Gabriel Pierne, Paris, 1902. Editor Sarah Bernhardt. Eduard Napravnik, Francesca da Rimini, opera, St. Petersburg, 1902. Sergei Rachmaninoff, Francesca da Rimini, opera in 4 acts, libretto by Modest T. Tchaikovsky, Moscow, 1906. Luigi Mancinelli, Paolo e Francesca, opera in 1 act, 1907. Emil Abrani, Paolo e Francesca, opera in 3 acts, libretto after Dante by Emil Abrani, S.R. Franco Leoni, Francesca da Rimini, opera in 3 tableaux, based on Crawford's play Paris, 1914, opera comique. Primo Recitali, Francesca da Rimini, opera. Riccardo Zandonai, Francesca da Rimini, opera in 4 acts, libretto by Tito Ricordi, based on D'Annunzio, Turin, 1914. Nino Berini, Francesca da Rimini, play, 1924. Music: Gioacchino Rossini, Faro cum Luigi Piangi Dice, area musical setting of Inferno, Canto 5, lines 126. 1848. Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, Francesca da Rimini, symphonic poem, 1876. Arthur Foote, symphonic prologue, Francesca da Rimini, Op. 24, 1890. Antonio Bazzini, Francesca da Rimini, symphonic poem, Op. 77 Berlin 1890. Pierre Maurice, Francesca da Rimini, Symphonic Poem, Op. 6, 1899. Paul von Klenau, Francesca da Rimini, Symphonic Poem 1913, revised 1919. Olga Gorley, Paolo e Francesca, guitar duo from the album House Music. 20th Century Chamber Music for the Home 2000. Medieval Beads, The Circle of the Lustful from the Rose album 2002. Saverio Mercadante, Francesca da Rimini Opera 1830-31. Film, Paolo e Francesca 1950 film by Raffaello Matarazzo. Art, Joseph Anton Koch, Paolo and Francesca Surprised by Gianciotto, Watercolor 1805, Thorvaldsen Museum, Copenhagen. Marie-Philippe Cupin de la Couperie, The Tragic Love of Francesca da Rimini, Oil on Canvas 1812, Napoleon Museum, Arenberg. Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, Paolo and Francesca, Oil on Canvas 1819, Musée des Beaux-Arts, Angers, France. Ari Scheffer, Francesca da Rimini and Paolo Malatesta appraised by Dante and Virgil, Oil on Canvas 1835, Wallace Collection, London, an 1855 version is in the Louvre, Paris, and there are other versions. Gustave Doré, Francesca da Rimini, several illustrations to Dante's Inferno 1857. Dante Gabriel Rossetti, Paolo and Francesca da Rimini 1862. Alexander Cabanel, The Death of Francesca da Rimini and Paolo Malatesta, Oil on Canvas 1870, Musée d'Orsay, Paris. George Frederick Watts, Paolo and Francesca, Oil on Canvas between 1872 and 1884, private collection. Auguste Rodin, The Kiss Marble Sculpture 1888, Musée Rodin, Paris. The Tete-a-Tete, The Dagger Scene and the Lover's Death.